The storm trapped us in a mountain cabin. Then she whispered, "Make tonight burn." The antique brass barometer on the mantel dropped into the red before Amelia Bennett finally looked away from the unsigned lease folder. Outside, the blizzard struck the cabin hard enough to make my digital anemometer chatter in my hand. Numbers stacked faster than my model had predicted, while snow lashed the windows in white sheets. The fire behind Amelia threw warm light across the stone hearth, but the room still felt wrong, not because of the storm. Storms had rules. The wrong thing was Amelia. She sat on the worn leather sofa with a cold mug of tea and the lease folder across her knees. A cream thermal sweater was buttoned high under her cardigan, sleeves pulled over her hands against the draft. When the barometer clicked above the mantel, her thumb pressed into the folder seam until the paper bent. I had chased storms across 3 states and spent 3 years building a localized forecasting model that every grant committee called too narrow. I understood pressure. I understood warning signs. Amelia Bennett was sitting inside one. "The highway patrol closed the pass 20 minutes ago," I said, keeping the anemometer low at my side. "The north road is buried. The south switchback is already drifting shut, and the county plows won't come up here until the front passes. We are cut off." She lifted the mug, then seemed to remember the tea had gone cold. She set it back on the coffee table without drinking. "I know. You knew the closure was coming?" I glanced toward the window, where the storm had turned the pine line into ghosts. My satellite uplink case sat beneath the table, its folded antenna still locked down, the green status light dark until I could get a clean angle through the cloud deck. "And you stayed." "I have until tomorrow morning to countersign the lease on this property," she said. Her voice stayed level, but the handle of the mug tapped once against the saucer. 8 o'clock. If the holding company does not receive the final authorization by then, my deposit defaults. My former business partner structured the clause because he knew I would struggle to get up here this week. I looked at the folder again. He used the storm window. He used the forecast. She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. He still has access to the old scheduling dashboard from when we ran the city wellness studio together. He knew the notary could only meet today, and he knew I had already moved the deposit into escrow. If I miss the deadline, the money reverts to the parent company, and he can argue I breached the separation terms. A hard gust slammed into the western wall. The cabin beams answered with a low, wooden groan. Amelia's eyes flicked up to the ceiling, then back to the folder. "So you drove up into a blizzard," I said. "I drove up into a weather event," she corrected, and for 1 second the business owner showed through the exhaustion. "You're the meteorologist. You tell me how bad it is?" I set the anemometer on the rough-hewn timber table beside my weather console. It's a localized bomb cyclone. Pressure is dropping faster than my model's danger threshold. We are going to lose power. We are going to lose cell service. The temperature will fall below -20 before midnight, and if that bay window fails, the living room becomes a freezer in minutes. She swallowed once. Her gaze went to the antique brass barometer above the fireplace. Its needle rested deep in the red, polished glass reflecting the fire and her pale hands. "My mentor used to say you don't fight the front," I said. "You prepare for it and let it pass." I drew a slow breath, because the next part mattered. "Do you want me to help you secure this place, or do you want to handle it yourself?" Amelia looked at the water-stained lease folder, then at the storm swallowing the window. "I want you to help me." "Okay," I said. "Then we start now." I moved through the cabin the way I moved through every field site. Not fast, not slow, just without wasted motion. Panic makes people loud. Weather kills loud people first. I checked the oak door seals with the back of my fingers, feeling for the bite of air. I taped the narrow cracks along the north window, casing with thermal weather stripping, and marked the weak spots in pencil on the sill. Amelia watched for 10 seconds, then stood. "What do you need me to do?" "Water first," I said. "Bathtubs, stockpots, storage bins, anything with a lid. When the grid goes, the well pump stops. Fill what you can before the pipes freeze." She did not ask why again. Boots crossed the hardwood. Cabinet doors opened. The kitchen faucet started running. She converted fear into tasks. By the time I finished the northern exposure, the wind had become a physical weight against the cabin. The walls gave a long, strained creak. In the kitchen, Amelia had dragged a plastic storage bin under the sink, but could not angle it past the old copper pipe. "Hold there," I said, stopping beside her without taking over. "Do you want me on the far side?" She looked from me to the bin. "Yes. If you lift, I can guide the corner." On 3. We raised it together. The plastic scraped against the porcelain. Her sleeve brushed the edge of my glove, and I kept my attention on the weight in my hands. 1 inch left. She shifted her grip and slid the bin cleanly beneath the faucet. Water hammered into the bottom, echoing in the small kitchen. A little breath escaped her, almost a laugh. "It sounded expensive," she said. "Everything in cabins sounds expensive during storms." Her mouth softened at one corner. In a room being squeezed by a blizzard, it counted. The lights flickered at 6:17 p.m. I knew because my weather console logged the voltage drop the same moment the lamp beside the sofa stuttered. Amelia froze with a saucepan in both hands. The bulbs buzzed once, gave a final thin pulse of yellow, and died. The cabin fell into the kind of dark that mountain storms make complete. "Phase 2, I said. I clicked on my flashlight and aimed it at the ceiling so the beam spread soft instead of cutting into her eyes. The fire became the center of the room, orange and low. The barometer gleamed above it like an old captain pretending not to be worried. "The paperwork," Amelia said. Her voice changed on that word. Not louder, tighter. She looked toward the living room, where her briefcase sat beside the sofa. "The lease documents are in there. If the roof leaks, if the window breaks, if anything happens to them, I can get the folder, or we can go together with the flashlight." I said, "Your call." She moved before I finished, together. I angled the light ahead of her. We crossed the room while sleet ticked against the glass. She snapped open the leather briefcase, removed the manila folder, and held it flat against her chest for 1 second before catching herself and setting it on the table. The gesture told me more than any confession. That folder was not paperwork to her. It was a door. "Is the cabin structurally sound?" she asked, looking up at the heavy beams. "It's old-growth pine," I said, sweeping the light over the trusses. "It can take the snow load for this system, provided the roof sheds evenly. Temperature is the bigger problem. We need to concentrate heat." "How?" "Bedroom mattress comes out here. We close the interior doors, build a heat pocket near the hearth, and stop feeding warm air into unused rooms." I paused, keeping the flashlight steady. "Do you want the head end or the foot end?" For some reason, that made her breathe out through her nose. "Head end. I have strong opinions about corners." "Good. Corners usually deserve suspicion." It was a poor joke, but she smiled, and the room got 1 degree easier to stand in. We hauled the mattress down the narrow hallway. It jammed in the doorway twice. Amelia pushed from her side, cardigan sleeve slipping over one hand, jaw clenched with effort. I shifted the angle by feel. The old bed frame scraped the wall behind us. "Left," I said. "My left or your left?" "The useful left." "That is not a direction." "Caleb, it is in fieldwork." She huffed something close to a laugh, corrected the angle, and the mattress slid free. We dropped it in front of the hearth. Dust rose from the floorboards, caught in the firelight, then disappeared into the dark. I went to the covered wood box on the porch. Snow hit my face like handfuls of salt. The porch boards were already slick, and the forest beyond the railing had vanished. I hauled in cedar and oak until the stack beside the fireplace would last through the worst hours, then came back inside with ice clinging to my jacket. Amelia had closed every interior door. The storage bins were full. The lease folder sat inside her briefcase, wrapped in a trash bag and tucked away from the window. She had looked at the problem and moved the vulnerable piece out of the damage path. I pulled a wool emergency blanket from my bag and held it out. "Your sweater will not hold heat if the room drops another 10 degrees, I said. "Do you want this?" She took it. "Yes." No argument, no performance, just the clean transaction of people trying to survive a night. I knelt by the fire and built the flame back up, feeding cedar kindling into the embers until the hearth cracked and breathed. The room smelled of cedar smoke, wet wool, and the metallic dust of the weather console warming near my knee. Amelia sat on the mattress with the blanket around her shoulders, one hand on the sealed folder. "Your former partner?" I said, placing an oak log over the flame. "Why does he want the cabin to default?" "Because it is mine." I looked up. Her eyes stayed on the fire. The city studio was mostly his vision. Fast growth, expensive memberships, corporate retreats, executive detox weekends with glass walls and terrible juice. I built the operations because I was good at making impossible schedules work. When we split, I took the buyout and found this place. Her thumb smoothed the trash bag over the folder once, then stopped. A smaller retreat, quiet, practical. Something that did not pretend burnout could be fixed by selling people a more expensive kind of exhaustion. The wind shoved the west wall. The chimney moaned. The barometer needle had bottomed out. "He hates that you're doing it without him," I said. "He hates that I want less." She gave a thin smile. He called it a failure of ambition. I added another piece of wood to the fire. Some people only understand height. They forget shelters matter. For a few seconds, only the fire answered. Then a whistle cut through the room. High, thin, wrong. I turned my head toward the bay window. A hairline gap had opened along the upper right pane, and the sealant was fluttering under the pressure. Fine powder snow pushed through in tiny bursts. The plastic sheeting in my bag suddenly became more important than the lease. "If that pane goes, this room equalizes with the outside temperature inside 4 minutes," I said. Amelia stood before I asked, "What do we do?" "The window needs bracing. Do you want the staple gun or the tarp?" "Staple gun." I liked that she chose the louder job. I unfolded the heavy plastic tarp and pressed it against the upper frame. The wind fought it immediately, snapping the sheet between us like a sail. We stood on opposite sides of the window frame, the glass radiating cold through my gloves. 2-inch spacing, I said. "Start at the top, press until the gun is flat to the wood." She raised the metal staple gun with both hands. Clack! The first staple bit cleanly. Good, again. Clack. We moved around the frame in a rhythm. I held the tension. She drove the staples. Every few seconds the tarp bucked so hard it slapped my forearm, and she waited for my nod before firing the next staple. Her cheeks were flushed from cold and effort, not embarrassment. Her eyes stayed on the work. At the bottom corner, a patch of melted snow under her boot slid. Her knee dipped. "Elbow," I warned, because giving someone the word before the help matters. She threw her arm out, and I caught the sleeve of her cardigan just long enough to steady her. The instant her boot found dry floor, I let go. "You okay?" She planted the final staple. Clack, "I am now." The whistle stopped. The silence afterward was almost shocking. The plastic bowed inward under the pressure of the storm, but it held. Warmth stayed in the room, fragile and earned. Amelia stepped back with the staple gun still in her hand. That was not how the lease walkthrough brochure described mountain charm. The brochure probably skipped the part about emergency vapor barriers. I would have remembered that bullet point. The joke was small, dry, and badly timed. The fire snapped, the tarp held, and for 1 minute the cabin felt less like a trap. At 9:40 p.m., the storm reached full force. The weather console logged gusts beyond the official ridge station's upper range. The handheld anemometer could only read what I could safely collect from the porch, and there was no safe porch anymore. Snow climbed the lower windows. The firelight made the sealed plastic shine like dark water. The brass barometer stayed pinned at the lowest pressure I had ever seen on that ridge. My grant review committee wanted proof that micro-terrain mattered. I had come because my model said the worst pressure collapse would happen here, not at the official station 15 miles away. If my instruments survived the night and transmitted clean packets, the grant stayed alive. If not, 3 years of work became a footnote with frozen batteries. Amelia watched me adjust the console power draw. "You keep checking that like it is a pulse," she said. "It is, for the model." "The forecast grant?" I glanced at her. She lifted one shoulder under the blanket. You mentioned the university logo on the case when you came in, and you keep looking at the packet timer the way I look at payment deadlines. I almost smiled. The model needs this storm. And you need the model. More than I should, I tightened the cable connection and shifted the console closer to the hearth, far enough from heat damage, close enough to preserve battery efficiency. Storms make sense to me. People do not. She looked at the fire instead of answering. People can be forecasted sometimes. No, they can be guessed. That is worse. That came out sharper than I intended. Amelia's hand stilled on the blanket edge. The old barometer clicked once above us, absurdly polite in the middle of my mistake. I looked down at the console because instruments do not make faces when you hurt them. My last relationship ended while I was in the field, I said after a moment. No fight, no warning. Just a message waiting when I came back from a tornado intercept. By the time I got home, the apartment was half empty and every plant was dead except a cactus I hated. Amelia's mouth twitched. You hated the cactus? It looked judgmental. A real laugh escaped her, short, surprised, and gone quickly, but real. I felt the corner of my own mouth move. The cactus survived out of spite. I respect that now. The humor passed, leaving something quieter behind it. I did not come up here because I was brave, she said. I came because if I stayed in the city one more day, waiting for Evan to decide whether I deserved my own future, I was going to become the person he kept describing. Evan, I repeated. My former partner. She rubbed the edge of the blanket between her fingers. Evan Rourke. He never raised his voice. He just moved deadlines, moved money, moved access. By the time you realized he had closed a door, he was already explaining why it had always been your idea. The wind hit hard enough to dim the fire. I fed another log into the flames and watched sparks climb the chimney. Then we document the closed road, I said. We document the pressure drop, the state order, the failed notary access, and the dead contract if there is one. We do not force a front. We prepare the file and let it pass through the system where it has weight. Amelia looked at the brass barometer, then at me. You make paperwork sound like sandbags. In a flood, sandbags are romantic. This time her smile lasted. At 10:12 p.m., I unfolded the satellite antenna. The uplink module was built for compressed meteorological packets, not contracts, but low bandwidth only cares whether the message is small enough to survive the sky. I set the device near the sealed window, angled the antenna against the frame, and connected the cable to my ruggedized laptop. It will take 20 minutes to acquire a signal through this cloud deck. I said, get your paperwork ready. Amelia opened the manila folder again. Inside were the lease packet, separation addendum, notarization instructions, escrow receipt, and a printed page with the remote signing portal requirements. She lined them up with the precision of someone trying not to shake. I watched only long enough to see that she had the right documents, then turned back to the laptop. I can open the relay tunnel. You read the destination code. You type the authorization key yourself. Why? Because it is your signature. She looked at me for one breath too long, then nodded. The uplink beeped once, failed, and went back to searching. While it hunted for signal, we built the smallest possible plan. She read the portal instructions. I translated the bandwidth limit. She wrote the lease ID on the back of a grocery receipt because the pen worked better there than on glossy contract paper. I checked the timestamp clock. She caught that the holding company required Eastern time. Together, we made the kind of file that would either save her future or prove who had tried to steal it. The uplink beeped again. Signal locked. Connection is live, I said, fingers moving over the keyboard. Destination IP or SMS shortcode. She read the string from the top of the contract. I typed it in, watched the route resolve through the university server, and opened a plain encrypted text relay. The portal is listening. Authorization key. Amelia looked at the signature page. Her brow tightened. Then she flipped it over. Then the next page. The fire popped behind us. It is not here, she said. Check the addendum, I said, keeping my voice level. She checked. The paper began to rattle in her hands. "It is supposed to be printed on the bottom of the signature page." She held the sheet up to the laptop glow. "There is only a gray box." I leaned close enough to see the page, not close enough to crowd her. The blank authorization field was not a printing error. It had been flattened into the document, a dead space where the key should have been. "He voided the physical copy," she said. The sentence came out thin, stripped of air. "Evan printed me a dead contract. The only way to sign is in person with the notary, and the notary has the master key. He knew I would try to find a workaround. He wanted me trapped here with paper that could not open anything." The terminal cursor blinked on an empty command line. Amelia lowered the blank signature page onto the mattress. Above the fire, the brass barometer clicked once, as if marking the bottom of the storm. For the first time that night, she stopped moving. "I lost," she said. I did not tell her she had not. I did not insult her by pretending the dead contract did not matter. The road was closed. The notary was unreachable. The portal needed a key she did not have. The deadline was not theoretical. It was printed in black ink on a page designed to become a weapon at 8 in the morning. So I took out my field notebook. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Listing the facts." "That will not give me the key." "No," I said, "but it can prove why the key was impossible to obtain." I wrote in tight block letters, because my handwriting gets worse when I care. Highway closure, timestamp, pressure drop, timestamp, wind gusts, timestamp, notary cancellation, physical copy missing authorization field, remote portal inaccessible without master key. Pattern suggests engineered impossibility, not buyer delay. Amelia watched the pen move. "My model can generate a formal meteorological report," I said. "Data, not drama. Road closure orders, localized gust readings, pressure charts, temperature curve, and a sworn statement explaining travel risk. Your attorney can attach it to an emergency extension demand. If Evan calls this your failure, the record will show his clause met an impossible weather event he knew about in advance." She stared at me. The fire reflected in her eyes. Not romantic, not soft, just hot enough to stand near. "You would put your name on that? If the data supports it, and if it risks your grant?" I looked at the laptop, where the uplink timer was still counting packet windows. The grant is supposed to fund better warnings for isolated places like this. If I am only willing to use the data when it helps me, the model deserves to die. Amelia reached for the dead contract pages. Her fingers steadied as she stacked them. "I need photos first." I handed her my phone without unlocking anything beyond the camera. She photographed every page, the blank gray box, the escrow receipt, the remote signing instructions, and the notary email showing the cancellation. Then, she sent the images to her attorney through the same low-bandwidth text relay, one compressed file at a time. Each packet took nearly 2 minutes. Each successful send made the laptop beep, small and stubborn against the storm. When the final file went through, she set the dead duplicate pages on the hearthstone. "These are not the only copies," she said. "No. The evidence is saved." "Yes." She looked at the contract, then at the flames. Her hand did not shake now. The fire made the gray box glow pale before the paper touched it. She turned her head slightly toward me and whispered, "Make tonight burn." Then she fed only the dead duplicate copy into the fire. The pages caught slowly, curling at the corners. Then the flame found the ink, and the useless clauses blackened. Amelia watched until the blank authorization field folded inward and disappeared. I stayed still. The storm had taken the power, the pass, the notary, the signal twice, and most of the temperature from the room. Amelia had kept her evidence and burned only the paper meant to make her feel helpless. She shifted closer to the fire, leaving the folder between us on the mattress. Not a wall, not an invitation, a boundary we both respected. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we write the report." So we did. The next 4 hours became the kind of work I trusted most. Exact, boring, necessary. I exported pressure readings. Amelia typed the timeline, correcting every phrase a lawyer would hate. I wrote localized bombogenesis. She deleted it and wrote rapid, severe pressure, drop documented at property location. Less dramatic, she said. Less accurate. More useful. I let her keep it. At 2 a.m., I brewed the last of her tea and split a protein ration. She tasted hers and made a face. This is aggressively practical. That is the brand. By 3:15, the report had shape, weather data, timeline, sworn statement, closure notices, and transmission logs. Amelia sent the draft to her attorney with the subject line her own hands typed, "Request for emergency lease extension due to documented force majeure and bad faith obstruction." At 4:05, her attorney replied, "Even compressed into plain text, the message felt like heat. Received, evidence sufficient to demand immediate extension. Do not attempt travel. I am issuing notice to holding company and opposing counsel now." Amelia read it twice. On the second read, her shoulders lowered far enough for the blanket to slip. She caught the edge before it fell, then looked at the barometer. The needle had not risen yet, but it had stopped falling. "Does that mean the worst is over?" she asked. "It means the front has bottomed out." That was not my question. I looked at the sealed window, the stacked wood, the full water containers, the report sitting on the laptop screen, and the attorney replied, glowing like a little flare in the dark. "No," I said, "but we prepared well enough to meet what comes next." She nodded once, as if that answer fit better than comfort. When she finally slept near the hearth, she did not sleep against me. She slept with one hand curled around the edge of the wool blanket and the other near the folder. The blanket slipped toward the floor an hour later. I tucked the edge around her boots, fed another log into the fire, and returned to the console before she could wake enough to thank me. The storm eased near dawn. Not all at once. Weather rarely gives you drama when it can give you increments. The roar thinned into a whistle. The windows stopped shuddering. The snow still pressed against the glass, but the pines outside had edges again. Gray light entered through the tarp-sealed bay window, turning the room from emergency shelter back into a cabin. Amelia woke as the satellite uplink beeped. She sat up slowly, hair mussed from sleep, blanket around her shoulders. For a moment she looked disoriented. Then her gaze snapped to the laptop. "Attorney?" 2 messages. I turned the screen toward her. Her attorney had filed the force majeure notice before the deadline. The holding company granted a 5-business-day extension, froze the default trigger, and requested verification of the missing authorization key. Amelia pressed one hand over her mouth, then dropped it to the folder. Her fingertips landed on the saved copies, not the ash in the hearth. "I have 5 days. You have a record." I said, "5 days is just the container it came in." She read the message again. The fire had burned low behind her. The barometer needle had climbed one narrow mark out of the red. "What about your model?" she asked. I checked the console. The final packet had transmitted at 5:42 a.m., carrying the localized pressure collapse, gust curve, temperature drop, and power failure record. The official ridge station 15 miles away had missed the worst of it by 12 millibars. "The model caught what the county station missed," I said. Amelia leaned toward the screen, reading the chart. "So the cabin saved your grant too. The storm saved the data. The cabin gave it somewhere to happen." I looked at her. She was tired, wrapped in a wool blanket, sitting beside a dead contract's ashes and a laptop full of evidence. She looked nothing like someone who had been rescued. She looked like someone who had held a line until help became useful. At 8:03 a.m., her attorney called through the satellite voice patch. The connection was terrible, all static and clipped syllables, but the message came through. The holding company had accepted the emergency extension. Evan's counsel had already objected and been told the default trigger was frozen until the title office investigated the corrupted physical packet. Amelia took the handset herself. "This is Amelia Bennett," she said, voice rough from smoke and no sleep. "Tell them I will sign in person as soon as the pass opens, and tell Evan Rourke that any further interference goes through my attorney, not my inbox." The static cracked. The attorney said something I could not hear. Amelia's chin lifted. "No, do not soften the wording." I looked down at my notebook so she would not catch me smiling. After the call, we cleaned the room in practical silence. She folded the emergency blanket. I packed the uplink. She labeled the water containers because, in her words, future panic should not have to guess which bin is for drinking. By afternoon, the emergency channel confirmed plows would not arrive until morning. That meant one more night in the cabin, but no immediate danger if we kept the fire steady. The grant committee called at 3:20 p.m. I took the call outside on the porch. Snow stood waist-high against the railing, and the university program director's voice came through with formal caution. "Your packet shows a localized pressure drop substantially below official station readings," he said. "And the emergency report was independently time-stamped before civilian council used it?" "Yes." "That helps your case. Applied forecasting, real-world risk reduction, remote infrastructure relevance. The committee will want the full data set. You will have it when I have stable bandwidth." "This does not guarantee renewal," he said. Then, after a pause, "But it keeps you in review." The line clicked dead. I stood on the porch with snow biting through my boots, one hand still on the satellite handset. In the window reflection, I saw Amelia inside, setting the brass barometer straight on the mantel. She adjusted it carefully, then stepped back as if restoring that one object could restore the room. I had spent years chasing destruction and calling it purpose, watching her polish frost-smudged brass with a dish towel. I wondered if the point of predicting a storm was giving someone enough warning to keep the shelter standing. I did not say that out loud. I opened the cabin door and went back inside. "Good news?" Amelia asked. "Review continues." "That is meteorologist for yes?" "That is meteorologist for not no." "I will take not no." "So will I?" She handed me the dish towel. "Your barometer has soot on it." "It is not my barometer." "It was judging you?" I took the towel. "The cactus has competition." She laughed again, brighter this time, and the sound traveled all the way to the rafters. The pass opened the next afternoon. We did not rush. Amelia called the title office from the town notary before signing anything. Her attorney stayed on speaker. The missing authorization key had been stripped by a template controlled through Evan's old administrator account. The title officer generated a clean packet, watched Amelia sign, and filed it before closing. Amelia did not let me speak for her. When the title officer called it an administrative mistake, Amelia placed the photographs on the counter and tapped the blank gray box. "This was not a mistake," she said. "It was an obstruction. The extension protected me from the deadline. It does not erase the record." I stood by the wall and said nothing. Sometimes the right help was not stepping forward, just staying present while she held the room. The title office issued written confirmation at 4:41 p.m., lease secured, default clause suspended, deposit preserved, cabin under Amelia Bennett's control. Outside, the plowed road steamed. Amelia stood beside my truck with the folder under one arm and the signed confirmation in her hand. "You should go celebrate," I said. "I should sleep for 14 hours. That is also a recognized form of celebration." She smiled, but it faded gently. "Caleb." I waited. "I know you are careful because storms have taught you to respect distance," she said. "I am not asking you to stop being careful." The truck ticked as the engine cooled. Snowmelt dripped from the wheel wells, ordinary and strange after the mountain. "What are you asking?" She held the lease confirmation between us. "When the retreat opens, come see what survived." It was not a demand. Her future was already in her hand. The road was open. The deadline was beaten. The choice stood. "I will," I said. 3 months later, the mountain was green. The snow had retreated above the tree line, and the road smelled of pine needles and sun-warmed cedar. I parked on the newly graded gravel drive. A small wooden sign hung by the entrance. "Rest before you break." The cabin door stood open. Inside, the living room had changed without becoming unrecognizable. The bay window held new weather-rated glass. The antique brass barometer still sat above the mantel, polished now, its needle resting in the safe zone. Below it sat the framed storm report. I stood there too long reading my own words. "You are allowed to come all the way in," Amelia said. She stood by the fireplace with 2 investors and a local nurse, a cream cardigan over her dark green dress, practical shoes planted near the emergency supply shelf. "You moved the report," I said. I framed it. "That is worse. It is evidence. It is 3 pages of barometric data. It is the reason this room exists." Amelia turned toward the room and raised her voice. "Everyone, this is Caleb Parker," she said. "His forecast report preserved the lease, and his model is why our winter safety plan uses microclimate alerts instead of generic county warnings." A warm murmur moved through the room. A nurse asked about evacuation thresholds. Someone else asked about the new windows. Amelia let me answer the technical questions, then stepped in for retreat operations. Not behind me, not in front of me, beside me. Near the end of the soft launch, she handed me a small wrapped square. "I thought housewarming gifts were for the owner," I said. "Consider it a fieldwork correction." Inside was a restored antique anemometer, brass and glass with real calibration marks. The note beneath it read, "For the man who taught me not to fight the front." I looked from the instrument to the mantel. The old barometer held steady. The restored anemometer caught a draft from the open door and turned once. Amelia stepped to my side, close enough that our sleeves touched, with the whole room around us and nothing hidden in the gesture. "You came," she said. I said I would. "I know." She looked at the barometer, then at the people gathered in the room she had fought to keep. I wanted to see if that still felt different when the storm was over. "Does it?" She answered by taking my hand for one brief, steady second, then letting go first before greeting another guest. The choice was public, and hers. I watched her point out the emergency shelf and laugh about force majeure paperwork and check the fire with the confidence of a woman who knew the shelter belonged to her. Above the mantel, the brass barometer stayed in the safe zone. Beside it, the little anemometer turned. For the first time in years, I checked the numbers not because I feared the pressure would drop, but because the weather had changed, and I wanted to learn the shape of staying. The end.